So, amongst our topics here is discussing the family. I want you to come into tonight understanding that it's going to be discussions that go beyond the material for this week. Because if you have already done your ABs for this week, you notice that there was some paucity of information in these chapters. It was not very rich. Information, there was some good information, but it was not comprehensive, and it also assumes that you understand certain things. And that's what we're really going to talk about, is what's missing, okay?
But it even just assumes, again, this book was written in 2001. It's Christian education for the 21st century, and it was written, for all intents and purposes, before the 21st century had even begun. And now, 20 years into almost the 20th century, it's just amazing how much. This book was written, probably published before 9/11 happened. And the degree to which our culture has changed, the degree to which some of the assumptions they have even about what is acceptable and not, what has sort of become passe even in most Christian circles.
Give me an example.
Well, you just think of just what we talked about with same-sex attraction, homosexuality, and the prevalence of that in denominations as conservative as the Presbyterian Church in America. There are conversations about appropriating gayness in the kingdom. Mm-hmm. Not the practice of it, for those who are listening to the video, but there's a sense of the culture of that, the subculture, and to what extent that attraction is a part of your identity. What role can that play then in your Christianity? Or should it not? Should that attraction in and of itself and the effect that has on your identity be, seen in a different light?
Right.
And 2001, nobody in the PCA is having that conversation. Period. Hard stop.
No one could. But at the same time, larger themes have emerged. In 2001, we had an idea of a spectrum. So, since I already had one mark up here. So, if we look at this spectrum, it's in the absolutes. Can you see this side? Okay, just making sure. So, if we have this absolute of heterosexual to homosexual, Carl Jung said that very few individuals are going to be at an end point. And he looked at this as we're all something, but it's probably not absolutely heterosexual, it's probably not absolutely homosexual. And the people who automatically knee-jerk react and say, no, I'm really totally, are the ones who are really closer to this side. So we had inklings, but research was methodologically impoverished at that point to let us understand, like, the pastor who was screaming all the time, because Ted Haggard hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
That's to put that in context. Ted Haggard, do you know who Ted Haggard was? Okay. So he was the president of the National Association of Evangelicals, which Erskine is an institutional member of. And he would fill stadiums with 60,000 people for his fiery sermons on the evils of homosexuality, that this is the devil. And he did it until the day he was arrested in a motel with his male prostitute smoking crack. And he had had a relationship with that male prostitute, sodomizing each other for 5 years. So it was not, ooh, I got high and did something stupid. This was long-term stupid. This was chronic stupid. So all of a sudden, we started to recognize that the ones who scream the most are the ones who are the most insecure that they might be somewhere over here. Now, this theory is pretty much out of vogue. It really doesn't hold up to any kind of decent methodologies, but the methodologies are so difficult to support or discount a theory like this. But to have the conversation is tough. To have the conversation. To automatically say, oh, well, God just created two genders. I think we've had that discussion in here before. Have we? Okay. So this is important. Coming from the medical perspective, not the psych perspective, I'll put on a different hat right now, okay? There are 4 ways of discussing gender, and this becomes very salient in a couple minutes up here, okay? So just saying gender. The first type of gender is what we call phenotypical. How we present. There is an old joke about sexing frogs, and the only way to tell the sex of most kinds of frogs is to flip it over on its back, spread its legs, and you look and see whether it's male or female. Some frogs have distensions of their throats for males, or most frogs don't. So most varieties of frogs, and there are thousands of them, most have to be flipped over on the back and you spread them wide. Phenotypical is what is the presentation. All fetuses begin default female. So for those of you watching this video, there are only men in this room at the moment. That means that all of us started out as fetuses as female. We expressed through interactions with the second, the chromosomal / genetic, our chromosomes and our genes expressed to have a relationship with the mother. So my genes interacted with the umbilical cord, with the placenta, with my mother, and she produced testosterone, which helped me produce my own testosterone, which allowed for the change in phenotype, even though the moment I was conceived, chromosomally, genetically, I was male. So remember, that's XY for males, XX for females. Chromosomes and phenotype interact. The phenotype is an expression of an interaction with your mother for this next one, which was the androgen. Take that off so you can read it. So androgenic are what are the hormones. You can have someone who has a penis but chromosomally is XX, female, but has a lot of testosterone in her system. Conversely, you can have a phenotypical woman who has a vagina, chromosomally is XY, a male, and may not have any androgens. If you watch the Olympics, Summer Olympics, there have been a couple of very high-profile cases of this over the past few years that have been happening because someone, there was a woman who was a runner for India, you remember her, and she had a child. The IOC made 5 gynecologists put that poor woman's ankles up in stirrups, take a speculum, insert it in the vagina, and look to see that that is a woman. She has born a child, okay? She is a woman. Phenotypically, that is a vagina. They checked her blood, checked the chromosomes, that is a woman. Her androgens were high though. She had not been doping. There were records of her her whole lifetime that she had high androgens, which is naturally occurring. And they asked her identity. How do you identify? She said, I identify as a woman. I'm a mother. I have a baby. I have a husband. Well, she's divorced now, but that's a woman. But the IOC said she couldn't run as a woman because she had high level of androgens. And remember, it's not just testosterone, that's one of many. But, so all of this to say that we have some issues. Here at Erskine, we have had a couple who, they were sweethearts in college. They were on different sports teams. She was actually an incredibly good athlete, but had always had gynecological problems, had seen a gynecologist her whole life because she had never had a period. But she's also less than 3% body fat. Elite athletes, you get that low, you're not gonna have a period, no matter what. No woman can have a period if they're that low in body fat. So they just wrote it off. But the gynecologist said, well, you look normal. Palpate, those ovaries feel normal. They couldn't have a baby. They waited, good Christian couple. They waited for marriage. They consummated that relationship, and they consummated it as much as they could. They tried really, really hard to get pregnant, but they couldn't get pregnant. And after a couple of years, they went to a specialist, looked at the chromosomes and said, well, sorry, but you cannot have children because you're both XY. Chromosomally. Even though she's got a serviceable vagina and he had been servicing it as much as the two of them could handle to try and have a baby. I apologize if you don't know my sense of humor yet. Her androgens, because of trying to regularize her period, they had been giving her birth control pills since she was 14, 15 to try and ease some of the problems that she had been facing because they thought that's what it was. And she identified as a woman because she had always had a vagina. She had boobs. Has, I should say, has. Present tense as of this video, as of this class, has. So that becomes a question to us, because if we're talking about Christianette of the family, do we talk about families? How would you counsel this young couple? If it were 100 years ago, you would just say, I'm sorry, you're barren. That would be the term. You're barren. How would you counsel them? How would you educate them on their reality? Any ideas from any of the three of you?
I think you'd have to talk about the fact that we live in a fallen creation, and that because of that, I mean, I don't know how it is to not have a kid, but I imagine it'd be very stressful and, what's the right word? Like you're not, probably like you're not good enough or something, or you know, like I should be able to do this and I can't, but why am I X, Y, as well as my husband? But I mean, I think the best hope you can give them is just like Job and how everything's taken from him. We have that promised restoration. At the second coming, I mean, everything will be restored, but in the meantime, you gotta hang in there. You gotta, I mean, it makes me think of adoption or something like that, foster care. But you don't want to cheapen them to be like, oh, you just have to wait. You have to.
Key point right there, right?
And yeah, I would say too, you know, it's sort of a cultural thing, but, you know, the sense of recommending adoption from a pastoral chair can sort of be, it feels like, oh, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
like you can't have your kids, you have to adopt, rather than us as a, not just evangelical subculture for political reasons, but because we are the people of the book, the God who adopts sinners who don't, by their nature belong to him. We don't esteem adoption as something that beautifully portrays the gospel, probably, no, I would say actually even more clearly than biological parenthood does.
Yes.
And so are we even, is that something that we're conscious of where we've preached about or taught about Christian education, brought our congregation to a point where now we have people who are struggling with, what it means to be parents, and we're able to say, listen, you get to show forth the fatherhood of God, the heavenly parent that we have, even more clearly than I can with the 3 children that my wife and I have had.
Yeah. You have to frame it correctly, the adoption. That's a good point. We kind of cop out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree with everything that's been said. And from a spiritual standpoint, and from a counseling as a pastor, first of all, I would say I don't know everything. I cannot explain God. But I will tell you this: God works through us, and we have to trust him. And I would almost, the adoption piece, there's a child out there that needs, and it's in God's plan for them to be adopted by 2 loving parents.
Yep.
Yeah.
And these are loving people.
Loving people. So, I would tell, I can't explain to you why you can't have children. I mean, why this is happening.
Yep.
I think it's the biggest mistake that we make as counselors and pastors is saying that we know everything, and we don't.
Exactly. We do not.
We do not. We cannot figure out God. God is a mystery. God is a mystery. But the Bible tells us over and over to trust him. It's one repeated and message over and time and to trust him. So we have to trust God on things like this. But the adoption piece of it may have been all in God's plan.
Another piece of it too, I mean, even, adoption, wanting to have children is one part of it. I could see there even being some identity shock in saying to a female, well,
You're
genetically you're XY, genetically you're not. And her hearing that and coming in, and even the husband sort of thinking, did I marry a man?
Yeah.
But being able to say, I like that whoever brought up Job, when Job is in the whirlwind and God's talking to him, the way that he humbles him is by asking him, were you there when I laid the foundations for the earth?
Yep.
And the foundational building blocks for what we are as organisms is genetics. You talked about your program in I can't remember one of the many thousands of schools that you've graduated
It
from.
was at UGA.
UGA, where
Advanced Biochemistry of Genetics.
the biochemistry of genetics, where it pushed people towards theism because of the complexity. So
Yep.
you don't tell somebody you're not a female because of one of the most confusingly deep and broad and humbling disciplines out there, because we don't understand it all. Just like what Franklin said, we are not God.
Well,
we
we're
cannot
also
say-
not geneticists as a general rule. We tend to not be fertility specialists. We tend to not be. Insert the descriptors here. This couple who graduated from Erskine, from the college here, I won't tell you what kind of church or anything else, because I have their permission to talk about their story but not identify them, because that's important. But they went to the pastor of the church that they had been going to, and as soon as they filled in the entirety of it, and they said, well, we found out why we haven't been able to have children. Oh, I'm so sorry that you're not going to be able to have children. You'd be such good parents. Well, it's because I'm XY, she said. What? Biologically, at my genetic level, I'm a man, she said to him. And all of a sudden, the whole thing flipped, and he demanded that they divorce because they were in a homosexual marriage, according to him.
Wow. See that?
How does the love of God get shown there? How has she ever been dishonest in any way, shape, or form? Other than through modern technology, she would never have known. So sometimes our questions in Christian education are based on what we know, what we understand. And that's real important to do something, an exercise like this, to talk about so that we can flow into what the text leaves out. The assumptions the text makes. So very important. The politics of identity, very small. When you have delivered a baby and, parents ask, is it a boy or a girl? No. No what? I don't know what it is. Because I see a little tiny thing there, but I also see something deep in there. Hermaphrodism happens. And it's not a fault of the child. It's not a fault of the parent. It's part of God's purpose. And that child bears God's image as much as you or me or anyone else. That's what we tend to forget. That's what we have to make sure that we understand here in order to move through. Especially this first article. There should be a few moments of reading this El Shaf, I'm going to say Tanel Shaf is, I guess, how I would pronounce her name. And her article, there are a few points in there that should have outraged you. Silently, quietly, because of omission. Bobby, you say it wasn't silent?
I don't know if you read my AD, but
Yeah, I did.
it comes as this very tired, annoying 20th century rant against the culture. She is absolutely epitomizing sort of the baby boomer angst that the later chapter talks about, where she's just mad at all the sex and drugs and rock and roll. And the church then becomes a petri dish for cultivating some kind of a cure for that. And you just miss everything. You miss the kingdom. You miss the gospel. You miss the fact that, as I said in my annotated bibliography, she's trying to figure out how we reestablish America as the new Israel, rather than considering that God may be sending his people into Babylon, and that we need to learn what it's like to minister there. We may be more Daniel than David in the 21st century as a church. And if we don't come into it with our eyes at least open enough that God may be choosing to not work through the culture to whatever extent he did when Judeo-Christian values were more at the forefront of society, and there were definitely some shortcomings in that era of American history, but he may not be choosing to work in a different way. I mean, and you look at the seedbed of the gospel in the early church. Mm-hmm. It was as pagan and hypersexualized and pluralistic and speculative as anything that America could hope to be.
And that's not even just Corinth either.
No, that's the whole Greco-Roman world. That was even the nation of Israel at the time had a lot of that going on. And the gospel exploded. People were primed for those answers from the church, rather than complacent about it. Yeah. And she just doesn't seem to be able to get that. But then again, there's 20 years of distance between what she wrote and what we're now experiencing, where we're a lot deeper behind the lines in Babylon than she would have felt in 2000, 2001.
Yeah. That's the point here about expectations and experiences. She's still around. She's still at Biola. I can only imagine if she were to revise this 20 years on, what would be the take? The basis of her work several of her articles have this basic schematic, the diagram. I reproduced it quickly. It's not exactly like in the book, so use the book if you're going to talk about the diagram. It's just in here to get you to think about it. Can we use her information to strengthen the family is the question that I have for you. Can we use it to strengthen? Yeah, somehow or other.
Sure, but again, there's sort of this undertone of her motivation behind it. But the things that she speaks about, the commitment, grace, empowerment, intimacy, all those things are things that should be true of the covenant community. But are you willing to dispense grace wandering sheep? Are you willing to empower somebody to not just stay as a part of the fold, but to come back?
How do you dispense grace in the modern era to people that you have told are sinners, and add whatever insult you're going to hear?
Right.
So we were talking before class about the issue of the policies in the dorms here have created an environment very much conducive in the dorms to homosexual relationships. So we have several teams that are predominantly homosexual at a Christian college. How'd that happen? Sports, Erskine Sports Academy. But this issue is because of trying to separate out without the wisdom of looking at social phenomena, without asking the questions of what do students think. I am shocked sometimes. I hate to say it because very few things really shock me, but I'm going to say it's social term here. When you talk in a general psychology course, Psych 201, first course that they take in psychology here, and you ask them about what is sex. What is sex? To us, all of us in this classroom, all of us watching the video might have different definitions. To me, a really good kiss is sex. If you don't have some sexual reaction, you are kissing wrong. But in this era, I feel a little bit out of touch at times when the kids are saying, oh, oral, that's not sex. What, it just an accident? You slipped and that went in there? Really? I don't think so. So the ideas, our language has changed so much that we have to be able to talk about this. How many youth pastors can answer a question of, well, Pastor Bobby, should I wrap that rascal? Excuse me? What? Well, you know, my girlfriend and I, we're going to the prom this weekend. Excuse me? But you have to be able to talk about these things without making them, you know, it's not just about guilt, it's about education, informing, of sharing lovingly the gospel of why you shouldn't be engaging in the behavior, why it's dishonest to yourself, it's dishonest to the gospel. Or if you want to go the public health route, just show them what happens when they have venereal diseases. Then, don't do that, okay? Just a joke. Don't do that in reality, okay?
Yeah.
You maybe get away with it with
Yeah,
soldiers. Military chaplain, I'm fine with you showing pictures like that if you need to. Here's why, what's going to happen to you if you...
Quick Google search.
Yeah. Give them a list of the worst of the diseases and have them do a Google image search, and all of a sudden, they're not going to be touching anyone until they're married and they have checked out the other person medically. But these ideas, how many of us are strong enough to engage in the dialogue with our learners? Yet if we cannot, we are denying the reality of God's creation. This is the way that we are made. Yes, we are fallen. That's how we act, not how we are made.
One of the interesting things I thought, again, just speaking about this book, it's, you know, in general, there's a lot of good stuff in the book. The age becomes apparent as you read it. And the generational chapter is very interesting, you know.
Oh, we'll get there, don't worry.
But one of the things that was interesting is that the generation now in our churches, the old people are the people who lived through the sexual revolution.
Yeah.
Now that has a certain stigma in the South. That means that it's not necessarily seen in the same light as it was pretty much everywhere else in the country, because we're in the Bible Belt, or I still am.
That was a key distinction right there.
My part of North Carolina still is. Well, my zip code. But it's
my block. We're going to say my block of my street.
The half of the street that the church is on. But, you know, the boomers are right there. And every other generation has either, moved on to their eternal pasture lands, or is very much close to it. And it's part of the fabric of our reality now. And for churches to continue to be ignorant of that question of, what are you going to do with the fact that it's not a question of having sex, it's a question of safe sex or not. Like, that's what they're going to hear literally everywhere else. And so what is the church going to say about it? And if the church isn't going to say anything, then not getting a venereal disease may be the best outcome you can hope for your high schoolers.
Yeah. If you really want to look into this more and cry, honestly, I will admit, I'm man enough to admit that I cried while watching. On PBS, there's a show called Frontline. And Frontline is a news show, it's documentary, it's very in-depth analysis. And they did one called The Lost Children of Oconee County. So, Conyers, Georgia. Yeah. And there was one of the largest syphilis outbreaks amongst children in history. You want to learn an awful lot about, especially affluenza, the parents that don't take care of their kids, that just leave them $20 for a pizza and say, I'll be home tonight, but we've got a second job, mommy and daddy are out, but at least you're in a 2-parent household. Thank God we're believers in a 2-parent household. We both have to work 2 jobs that one day we can retire and send you to college. And these kids, the parents also didn't realize you're away from home a lot. Your kids are probably going to go through your drawers. Kids are probably going to open up. If you have a liquor cabinet, probably going to open it up. And if it's forbidden fruit, it's going to taste twice as sweet. So parents had pornography and liquor, leaving money around, so the kids were able to get other drugs, all the rest of this. Next thing you know, they're having orgies, and sometimes with 30-year-olds involved with the group, and the whole group gets syphilis all over the place. And hear the descriptions, and all of a sudden, I'm sorry, but as a father, and when it came out, I think my daughter was like this big in the earlier mid-90s. Just astonishing. That's partly why this article is so important to talk about. It has a good set of ideas in this goal, nature, focus, process, venue, criteria, analytic approach to family life education. But it is a horrifically outdated set of scholarly ideas beyond that. We're not even talking about the sociologic manifestation here, okay? Just scholarly ideas of the set on the right, the preparational, enrichment, equipping, and remedial family life ministries. I would get rid of most of those for the average church and just start with remedial. Unfortunate reality is a lot of family life education is about teaching people how to be a family. Remediate because they don't know. And they've had horrible examples. They're not sure what love really means. And sometimes, you're tempted to just turn on, was it Tina Turner? What is love? Right? What's love got to do with it? That's it. I forget who sings that other song that had popping
One
up.
night at the Roxbury, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
Baby, don't hurt me no more. That's another one, yeah. They don't know what love is. The average human being on planet Earth no longer really is sure what love is. What is the difference between love and lust? What is true friendship? You want to really have a good debate about family life. One of the best examples that has been used throughout history is Jonathan and David. That is one of the best examples of love. True, pure, brotherly love. We're talking Psalm 133 level of love here, folks. That brotherhood that is God's blessing, that is overwhelming and pours down to, not just the beard, but the hem. And remember, that's about anointing a high priest, dumping this most expensive of all substances known to Israel, instead of dumping it in, either putting a thumbprint or a little cross, by the way. That was the other way to do it. A little cross on the forehead. Not Christian. Old Jewish cultists here. But it kind of fits us really well. Especially if it's a baptism and you have the chrism, if you're of that persuasion, then all of a sudden this idea, dumping this expensive stuff all over the head to make a high priest, and that we are so blessed like a high priest. That's the remediation that most of us need. We need to talk honestly about what is love. What is the idea of self-sacrifice? Not in some horrific, I am not worthwhile, so I'm going to just give up my life because I'm worthless, but I'm willing to give up my life because I am so valuable. But I see you as valuable, and because I love you, you have become more valuable. That's a difficult concept. To be able to put family first, whereas unfortunately the average American parent can't. They don't understand it. They don't see it yet. So it's condensing down into smaller and smaller units. The second chapter here, the chapter 22, Anthony. I think the most salient part was the idea of reminding us of covenant versus abuse. And that goes in exactly with what we were just talking about. We have to remediate and show people what a covenant is. What oath has God taken? And I'm intentionally being contentious here, as you know that. I adore that Hittite suzerain treaty language. That
Self-maledictory oath.
Yes. So we're talking full on Genesis 15 here. I love that. That is terrifying. Ripping apart the animals, cutting them in half, twisting the birds' necks, and God himself walking through in the form of a firebrand, saying, let this be done to me if I ever break my oath with you. And only God could do that to himself, so therefore, wow. Or the rainbow, this weapon pointing up at God. Wow, that's pretty darn cool. That helps us understand covenant. But if no one ever explains why God would take an oath by himself, then they think, oh, well, we shouldn't take oaths because, well, yeah, Jesus says, don't take an oath that you have no control over. Don't swear by anything that you don't have control over. Don't swear by your mother's grave. You don't have control over when she dies unless you're an evil murderer. You don't control that land. You don't control anything else.
You don't have control over who comes out your door first when you come back.
Yep. Excellent point. Excellent point. That's the issue of it. But we have to get into nuance with things like that. An oath is not bad if it is something you can control. But an oath, just to say an oath, no, I swear this is the way it is, I swear, then that's pretty horrific. The sociological approach I thought was meh. Again, this is where we're talking about it's a 20-year-old book now. This is a 2008 edition, but very few things were revised in it. More like, we just need more money, so we're going to issue it by the new ones. The changing paradigms, if you read through it, they are so different than paradigms now. The paradigm shift has elongated tremendously. The progression I want you to think about something, since we're talking about family life. We've mentioned about some of the theories of development. We've mentioned Jean Piaget, we've talked about Erikson, we've talked about a couple of the others, even Freud, that idiot. Got almost everything wrong, but he started the discussion in great ways because he was so contentious, so effective. If we look at an ability and we look at time, and I'm going to put age, since we're talking about people, children, we tend to think that you grow an ability and just do that. But that's not really how you develop. Bobby, you have small children right now, so you notice they start out in some of the abilities, it might be they can't move, they can't move, they can't move, all of a sudden they're up on their knees wobbling back and forth. And they do that for a while and then they started crawling. Uh-oh. They're back to just wobbling on their knees. Must be something wrong. But then they're crawling. And they're only a little bit wobbly, but they're sort of crawling. And then they're standing up. And then they're back crawling. And then they're walking a tiny bit. And then they're crawling. But they're walking. That's more like the reality of development right there. As you get older, the abilities change. It's not always forward progress, no matter what it is. Just because you did something yesterday doesn't mean you can do it today. Just because you had great faith yesterday does not mean you open your heart and soul to God as firmly and fully today.
Yeah, if your paradigm is that, progression in terms of the age is always in steps forward, then the concept of faith like a child seems backwards. And yet, you think of a child's ability to trust, to be dependent, to be able to imaginatively grasp the beauty of what God is trying to convey to them in the stories and in the chapters that He's preserved for us, rather than trying to systematize it all and find a gotcha for God.
Yeah.
There's something to that.
One of those great debates that happens on this campus all the time is someone will ask one of those wonderful questions that it's too easy, but we have to make it really hard. It's a question of worldview. And again, I'm being contentious for a reason here. Can God create a stone that is too heavy even for Him to lift? We've all heard the argument. Can we parse the issues within it well enough? Most kids will sit there and go, of course, God's God. God makes the decision, and God can make another decision. Why would I paint God into a corner and tell God what He can't do? Most kids would recognize that that is a conjunction between blasphemy and heresy. Beautiful little corner of the universe you got there. Talk about what block you live on. Well, I'm at the corner of heresy and blasphemy streets. Right there, that's me.
Right next to the rock so big God can't live.
Right next to that rock so big, so heavy. Yeah. So it takes a child sometimes to answer the most difficult and complex of questions, because they are not fighting their dogmatic issues. They're not fighting the battles that we tend to fight because of our insecurities. Back to the Jungian idea here about what are we really afraid of. We're afraid that we might be shown for being fake. There's something in psychology called imposter syndrome, which the reality is, at some point or other in a pulpit, you're going to feel. I have felt this before in a pulpit. And I was, I think, given a really good sermon. And it had tears of joy. It had people coming to Jesus. And I was really pleased. I get down to it and I was like, Had someone brilliant written that sermon, I could have just read that and done just as well. So, where is my special nature as a preacher? And felt like I was kind of an imposter. Even though I extemporaneously came up with that sermon after 20 hours, 30 hours of research and prayer about this and focused translations back to the Hebrew, back to the Greek, even had 2 Aramaic words that I, But you feel at times like a bit of an imposter. And that's part of that backwards that we have to understand and allow for, so that we don't make stupid pronouncements to a child who is trying to learn faith. Because a child will take punishment. A child will willingly give up food or endure pain for attention. If you have a child who does horrible things, throws temper tantrums, Williams' 1959, one of the classic studies of psychology, looked at 2-year-olds who were throwing temper tantrums. And, especially in grocery stores, that's when kids pick. They're like, I have a sociological understanding, you don't. I'm 2 years old and I'm smarter than you, parent. I can scream and get what I want already. I know the world. And Williams really found out from this incredible research study, developed so many new methodologies still used today, 1959. Realized that if you deny a kid attention when they're misbehaving, they stop misbehaving. If you reward a kid with attention when they're behaving well, they behave better all the time. Simple manipulation of the child. It's not really manipulation. Don't take that wrong. It's called parenting. But if you're not a very good parent, then Mama, I want that cereal. Mama, I want that cereal. Mama, I want that cereal. The minute you say, okay, give the kid the cereal, that kid is just one. You are now the subservient one. That child has just trained you. But a child is willing to give up food or suffer pain and abuse to get attention. That's one of the problems that we have. Kids are willing because they want attention, and a child is born with a sense of love. And that child loves the parent, period. Adopted, doesn't matter. They recognize you as parent. They love you, period. Unless you're abusive, and even then, they still love you. They can fall out of love with you if you're completely abusive the rest of life. But that's part of this backwards. The ministry to youth here really want to talk just a tiny bit here, because this is where, actually, why don't we go ahead and take a break now, even though it's 10 minutes before normal time, I think, and we're going to pick up here. That'll make better for the video. I'll edit that out.